everybody. Welcome to Ask an Expert. This is Jessa. If you're just listening, if you're watching, hopefully, hopefully that's registering. I am so excited for tonight's episode and excited for the guests that we have. The infamous Courtney Cooper is here with us, and really, her reputation does precede her. When I initially reached out to Courtney about doing this, I had emails to her from 2007. I don't know if I told you that, Courtney.
You did
but
tell me that.
I
Horse
had
hunting
reached.
for you?
I was horse hunting, and I'm sure. I mean, so many people in this community have probably landed in your inbox for the exact same reason, because Courtney really has become the go-to person, especially in this country, for helping match people with their next partner when they're in the market for a horse, kind of at any level. And in that role, she's also, of course, been in the saddle on now like literally countless horses and competing countless horses and training countless horses. So there is so much that we can learn from Courtney. We titled today's episode Matching Riders with Their New Partners or something along those lines, and we'll certainly talk about that. But because Courtney's depth and breadth of knowledge is so vast, we'll kind of take it where, I mean, there's just so much to learn. We'll take the conversation wherever it goes. But with that, first, I need to thank Courtney. Courtney, thank you so much for being here with us tonight. I know people are pulling at you in every direction, and your email inbox is probably climbing even as we're talking. So thank you for taking the time to teach us a little bit more about this.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm glad to be of help.
And I hope someday that I can be back in the market for a horse and you can be the one helping me.
You've been very successful with this, so I imagine the time will come soon.
There's still time. Well, to get started, will you share a bit about your story and how you got into, I don't know if you call your business like a horse sales business or sourcing and sales, but how you got into that role and when you got into that role, and kind of take us to present day?
Sure. So I have been selling horses really since I was 20, give or take. I sold some horses when I was in university at Rice in Houston, and came out of university with my degree, and knew that from a training perspective, I had a limited amount of time because I had a full-time career with Northwestern Mutual Life as a financial planner. And so wanted to always have sort of some up and coming horses for myself to ride. And so the ones that didn't work with me, or sort of I thought were nice horses, but maybe not ultimately upper level horses, I would sell. And so that gradually progressed to the point I moved up to Unionville. I was in Unionville proper for somewhere, I think, 5, 6 years, and rode and competed and sold horses. Did a lot of off the track thoroughbreds at that point, and then moved close to where we live now and where we bought our farm, which is only 25, 30 minutes from Unionville, and started importing horses from Ireland. And at that point, I was sort of doing a lot of fox hunters, lower level venters. The dollar was a very different thing, and shipping was a lot less. And long story short, a lot of things happened. 9/11 happened, shipping costs went up, Ireland joined the EU, blah, blah, blah. So then I went back to a lot of domestic sales with C Square Farm. That's our sort of domestic business, if you want to call it. Doing a lot of consignment sales for people, professionals, moms and dads whose kids were going off to school. And so we did that that was our primary business for about 15 years. And then about 8 years ago, started going back to Ireland. I paired up with my current partners there. And so now we have Excel Star Sporthorses, which are the imported horses from Ireland. And we have the domestic horses at C Square Farm, which is consignment sales for people. And then we also breed our own horses and buy our own horses domestically. And so we'll sell those as well. So we sort of have a three-pronged approach to selling horses. And so I've always enjoyed sales. I enjoy the interaction with clients and like to see people be successful. So that's sort of always been my interest.
And are you training horses within, like, are you personally training horses within all three of those prongs? Or how does it work once you get a horse within your program or umbrella before, turning it around? Is your model spend X amount of time with them or progress them to a certain point before listing them?
It sort of depends on the horse. A lot of times, for example, if a horse comes in domestically, let's say, that has been in this country and ridden by, let's say, a junior or an amateur, we'll spend about a week on it. I'll ride it. My working students will ride it. Um, we'll get a different feel for it, how it goes for different riders. If there are any immediate pitfalls or pratfalls that we need to be aware of, if the horse is very good in one phase. And I would have talked to the owner and the previous rider about it. Um, and then with that horse, usually within the first week or two, you have a good sense of sort of who the horse is. And so if I need to ride it, I'll ride it. If my working student can ride it, they'll ride it. I will still ride it probably. If the horses are here, they're ridden 5 to 6 days a week. So usually I'll ride them 3 to 4 times a week. And my working students might do the other 2 days. If it's a horse that's come in that is sensitive or needs some retraining or needs some hands-on work from me on the ground, then I'll obviously do all of that. Oh, I knew she was going to bark.
Truly,
Hold on 1 second.
every episode, anybody listening knows, every episode we have dogs barking. So it's just kind of part of the sport. And I have a dog here who probably will chime in as well.
Sorry about that.
Don't worry at all. It sounds
Out now.
like
So anyway, and then real quickly for the homebreds, we haven't sold a lot of them as foals or young horses, but we're always willing to do that if people have the right setup. But obviously with them, we start them, we break them, we bring them along. Right now I have a young man who's been with me for 3 years, and he's doing a lot of the young horses, our own homebreds, so that's been great for him. And then on the Excel Star horses, those horses generally come in having been started and worked and had a little competition experience. And the same thing, if they're a little bit harder to ride, I do most of the work. If they're a little easier, I allow my working students and riders to ride those horses, and then I do sort of touch-up work with them.
I think I want to be a working student at your farm.
It's a lot of work.
A lot of work, but what a cool opportunity to be exposed to so many different horses and different types of horses. Are most of the horses that are moving through your barn still landing in fox hunting or eventing?
No, well, in eventing, not so much fox hunters. We sort of don't sell mostly fox hunters. The imported horses now are more high end horses, and we've really worked on buying horses that have the right temperament and that are trainable and willing and kind, and that adult amateurs or juniors could bring along. And so those horses have gone on and been produced. We had one that won the Master Preliminary Year End Award in the AECs last year, and the woman who produced it got it as a 4 or 5 year old. And so that's sort of the model that we're looking at, more athletic types that potentially, we could rival Cooley or Fernhill, and
Totally.
right up there with Richard.
So your horses that come in the Excel Star horses, is Excel Star in their name?
Yes, generally.
Okay, so we'll keep an eye out.
There are a couple that are not named Excel Star, but generally they are.
And then the homebreds, do they have a similarity in their names?
Yes, so the homebreds all have Star in their name. So our foundation mare was by a stallion called I'm a Star, who is years back was a very famous stallion. And so we named all of our homebreds something star. Like we have Who's a Star and Our Star, and my current advanced horse, Our River Star. So all the homebreds have the star in their name, and then for the imported ones, Excel is sort of my partners from overseas. So together we're Excel Star.
Cool. All right. Well, now we know what to keep an eye out for.
There you go.
Do you make the trip to Ireland, or do you have a partner in Ireland that kind of scouts those horses and you can watch videos and whatnot before sending them over?
So I have two partners in Ireland, and we've been working together for 8 years. And I do a lot of travel over there, and enjoy going over, and it's always sort of a good way for us to reconnect and watch the horses. But their children are now riding on the European teams for Ireland, so they're very, very busy, as well as competing horses themselves. I have some upper level horses as well, so sometimes we can't get over, and so they will send me videos. And so I would say of the 40 horses I import, I would say easily 20 to 25 are sold off of videos. And then we sort of have a guarantee on them, and um, we'll swap out horses that don't work, or we'll sell them without a commission involved. And there's some ins and outs there. But when you get a horse off a video, it's a big deal, and it's a really big deal for me, because I feel like it's a huge vote of confidence. And so I want to make sure the horse lands and is what the horse is meant to be for you. And sometimes it doesn't work out, but our hit rate is pretty high. I think of the 225 we've imported, I think we've only had 12 that we've had to swap out or resell, or just didn't work
Yeah.
for whatever reason. So
That's a spectacular rate. And one of the things I'm really fascinated about is just how you have personally honed your eye for a horse that you see a future of success in. And you mentioned things like trainability and willingness and kindness in the horse. Over the years, what would you say are characteristics that you've really honed in on in terms of, like, characteristics, I guess, that you've honed in on as really important, and then maybe characteristics that you're like, these have become less important to me over the years?
sure, sure. So when I originally started going overseas, and when I originally were buying the off the track thoroughbred or the horse from someone else, I always looked at athletic ability. That was the driving force. Was that I really want a great athlete, and I don't mind if they're a little bit tough. Um, what I have learned over time and injuries is it is much easier to train something that's willing and kind than it is to, and maybe a little less athletic, than to deal with something that is tough and sharp and that sort of thing. And so for me, that's something that has really become paramount, that I want the horse that, when they see a problem or see something new, that they have almost an intellectual curiosity about it. That they sort of stop and maybe look at something and try to figure out what's going on and what they need to do with their feet, rather than running through an exercise or being forced to go through the exercise. And so for me, that's super important. For things that aren't important as much, I hate to say this, but barn manners to some extent. I mean, you don't always get to see the barn manners on a lot of horses that you buy. But I really feel like I've done some natural horsemanship stuff. And I think with a relationship with the horse and the animal over time, a lot of those things can be overcome. So if you have a horse that's a little bit pushy on the ground, or is a little bit difficult and whatever to load, or whatever may be the case, those are a bit more easily overcome. So a time in the saddle has, you want the time in the saddle to be productive, and for me, it's important that, and for my clients, the one thing I think all of us don't have enough of is time. And so we want that time to be productive. And so it's very frustrating if you have a horse and you you do some work for 45 minutes on a Monday, and then you come back Tuesday and you're at almost at square one again. Whereas if you do work on Monday and on Tuesday, you can come back and get 50% of that work. And then Wednesday, you get 55% of that work. And then you can build on it that way. Because I feel like when you go to a competition, for example, you probably lose 30 to 35% of your trainability. And so if you've got a horse that's sharp and difficult and anxious and doesn't want to join you in, sort of that middle ground, that is probably a much higher number, like 50 or 60%. And sure, there are those people who take on the hard horses, but that's sort of not my market anymore. That's not what I enjoy working with.
Yeah, I can see why, and I'm sure the people who come to you for horses when they're matched with one appreciate that approach too, because it really does make life kind of more pleasant. What does it look like when you're assessing the horses? Like you described it as like intellectual curiosity. So if you arrived at a farm to see some horses, what does it kind of look like to watch you start to finish, whether that's on the ground or just hopping right in the saddle? What are you presenting the horse with to start gauging if they have these qualities or if they don't?
I think a lot of times when I go to see a horse, most of the horses are tacked up. And so you can't really, you don't get to see a lot of the interaction of grooming and saddling. I think that can always be a little bit telling, because there's some horses that are very grouchy about being touched and dealt with and handled. And again, it's not that important, but it is a little telling. And then just very easily, if you walk up to the horse in the cross ties and not in a sudden or aggressive manner, but just to see how they react to you. Do they want to come over and put their ears on you? Do they want to look towards you? Do they want to engage with you? Do they want to have a conversation with you? And I think sometimes that can be a little misleading, because, for example, in our barn, um, some of the sale horses get more attention than others, and so some of them just are not as naturally sort of forthcoming as maybe another horse. So I think in a dealer's yard or in a sales yard, you have to be a little more cognizant of the fact that some of the horses are going to be a little bit more shy, to use a term. Watching the rider ride the horse, which I always think is paramount, that the horse is ridden by the person who is representing it, or the rider, before I or my client gets on. Like that's a full stop. I need to see it ridden. I'm not going to get on before I see you get on. So you're watching them interact and sort of do different things, and seeing, is there one corner that's a bugaboo, and how does the horse work through that? And most horses, when they're presented, are not going to be, they're going to be presented in the best light. So hopefully the horse knows all of the things that it's being asked of. But the real sort of feelings of, what's the curiosity of horses comes when the new rider gets on. How do they handle those first moments? I'm a big believer in, when someone first gets on a horse, one, does it stand at the mounting block? Two, if it doesn't stand at the mounting block, because it could have not been trained to stand at the mounting block, is it pushy about it? Does it sort of run off? Is it happy to sort of, if you pull on the rein, say, stand here? Is it good for that? Just that little moment of saying, oh, they want me to stand, I can stand here. Um, Asking the horse to halt, walking 10 strides and then asking the horse to halt, and, do they accept that? And then as you start working it around, and it's like a first date, when you try a new horse. And it is one of, I think, the most peculiar things that we do in sport, because most of the clients, they don't know me, they don't know the animal, they don't know the place where they are, and they don't know how the lines are set for the jumps. So there are lots of unknowns. And so it doesn't lend you to be very confident in it as a general rule. And so as you're going through all of these things, it's how the horse responds to the rider. Do they sort of, you know, hold the rider's hand and be like, "Hey, I'm there. I'm here with you. I'm gonna work through this." Or do they get nervous? Do they start looking outside of the ring? Do they um, sort of wander in their gaits? Do they spook? Do they get tight? What sort of things do they do? Those are all sort of indicators to me about how curious a horse is and how willing to work.
For somebody who's coming, let's put our let's put our thoughts through the lens of an adult amateur rider who is looking for their next partner at like low to mid level, something preliminary or below, and
Hmm.
has arrived at your farm with their trainer, which is probably, I mean, is that required for you that somebody brings a trainer in?
No. But before we go forward, I will always say, if you don't have someone you're working with, bring someone.
Mm,
And it doesn't, like, obviously a horse friend is better than someone who knows nothing about horses, but um, i- someone who knows nothing about horses is still better than nobody. Because sort of clients fall into two categories. They fall in love with the horse and it's rose colored glasses, and anything that the horse does is amazing.
totally.
Or they fall into the critical one where everything is horrible and anything the horse does, even if it like flicks its ear at the wrong time in the wrong place, is horrible. And so I think it's very easy, to do that. And especially if you've been shopping for a long time. Because if you've been shopping for a long time, or if you just started shopping, y- y- you know, you're either brand new to the process or you're a little done by the process. And so it's just helpful to have someone else there to ward off either extreme.
Totally. Yeah. Help you keep your perspective in check.
Exactly.
I definitely fall in the bucket of once I see one I like, everything they do is adorable. Even if,
Exactly.
even if it's puking all over the place. So let's say that an adult amateur comes to your farm, they do have a trainer with them.
Yep.
Is it, I mean, does it just depend on the adult amateur whether it's a good idea to have, I know someone on your side, let's say you ride the horse first. Should the trainer get on next and then the adult amateur, or is the ideal kind of just get the adult amateur on the horse once someone on
Uh,
your side has been on it?
Fortunately for us, generally we're showing multiple horses. And so I try to start with my quietest horse. It may not be the horse they actually want to see first, but it will get the person relaxed to have a confident experience and to get a feel for me and to get a feel for um, the arena and how the courses, how the jumps are set. Um, because if you can bring the stress level down, that's fantastic. If it happens to be the horse that they're interested in, fantastic. Um, but if you put someone on the less reactive horse you have, the animal you have, everybody will take it down a notch, which is great. Um, in terms of having the rider get on or whoever get on next, I think a lot of the professionals will know. I think one of the pitfalls that a lot of adult amateurs fall into is they either understate or they overstate their experience and their rideability, and so you get into a situation where you're dealing with someone who has, excuse me, I'm going to sneeze. Excuse me.
Bless you.
um you either get into a situation where you've got, let's say, a thoroughbred preliminary horse that's coming down the levels that tends to be a little sensitive, and you have someone who's like, oh, it's not a problem, I want a sensitive horse, but they've been riding half drafts, and so then you're like, oh, this isn't going to work at all. Or you have someone who has been riding a thoroughbred and rides quite well, and they've said that they want something really calm and quiet, and you put them on the half draft, and they're like, I don't want to work this hard. So, um, I don't really necessarily think the next person has to be um, the the buyer, the purchaser. If the trainer wants to get on, that's fine with me. Generally, with my horses, I know them well enough that you sort of get a sense of this will work or this won't work. And so if I have some concern, I'll have the professional. I'll be like, well, why don't you hop on professional and feel like if it's going to work. If I have any concerns.
Yeah, that makes sense. What are the right what are the right expectations for a potential buyer to have in terms of what goes on in a test ride? Like, should they expect that the horse is being ridden by whoever for a certain amount of time? Should they expect to be doing, a grid and a course and riding in a field? Like, what are the right boxes to check? And then when does it get to be too much?
I think it a little bit depends on the expectations of the individual. I have had people come to my farm and be a bit disappointed that I don't have an entire cross country course. And they're like, "Well, you're a 5-star rider and you do this for a living." And I'm like, "Right, and I have a ditch and a bank and some water and a couple, random fences, but Boyd has a beautiful facility that he spends a lot of money and effort and time and has lots of jumps." And so I go there. um, but I think for me, again, with the idea that it's a first date, um, walk track canter. Like if I'm watching a horse be ridden, I want to see walk track canter. If it knows some lateral work, I'd like to see some lateral work, shoulder in, leg yield, haunches in, half pass if it's an upper level horse. Um, then when it jumps, I'd like to see it trot a couple of jumps. I don't trot jumps a lot. And so that's not necessarily a priority of mine, but it'd be nice to see it trot a few jumps, especially if you have an adult amateur, just to make sure it's going to be quiet to do that job. And then in terms of what I expect when I go and try horses, I want a vertical and oxer. I want some filler for some of the jumps, and I want a line that's at least probably 5 strides long. Um, because the vertical and ox are fine. That's great. Filler just to see what they do and spook or don't spook. And then a line to see if the horse will increase its pace down the line. A lot of times when you go to, for example, more in Ireland than here, they'll have a vertical and an oxford, and that's it. That's all you get to try the horse over. And you sort of go, well, is it going to run down this line if I do that? And I'm buying mostly young horses, so it's not as big a deal. Um, but when I have amateur clients there, it becomes a bit of a big deal because, like, you want to see it do more. Um, so going back to your original question of what are the expectations, I think in that situation, if I had a client and I had a vertical and an oxer and I'd shown the horse and they really liked the horse, I'd be like, hey, can we break this down and do a line? Or can we pull something out of the corner and like a Liverpool and have it, underneath the fence, so that you can do different things. In terms of cross country or hacking or doing something along those lines, I think that depends on your time frame. For example, both in Aiken and in Pennsylvania, there are a lot of horses to see. So people will oftentimes make a multi-day trip. And if they make a multi-day trip, they're usually doing sort of first rides and then coming back for second rides. So they might want to see the horse off property. They might want to see the horse off property cross country. They might want to just come back and try the horse here. If it's a timid adult amateur and they, want to, or a young horse, they might just want to see it in the ring again and work on its flat work or get a better feel. So there are a lot of different options. But if you were, for example, going back to the Ireland example, if you're in a situation where you're only going to see that horse for that day, for that time period, then you need to do what you can do. And sometimes you're limited, quite frankly. And so um, a lot of people there, excuse me, don't have cross country courses. And so you need to get a video of someone going cross country. And ideally, someone who is similar to your rider. So, if the professional has a child, if it's a professional showing the horse and they have a 15, 16-year-old child, granted, they probably ride better than 95% of all Americans because they do, um, then they could take the horse cross country, so you could see them, or if there's a spouse that hunts and, doesn't do a lot of riding, but they could show the horse. So someone maybe with a little less experience, to show you how the horse goes.
That's a super cool way to approach, like, I wouldn't have thought of approaching it that way, but it makes a lot of sense to kind of cover that base as much as you can without being able to ride the horse in a field yourself. It sounds like you are very accommodating of people who come and try horses. Like you're mentioning a second ride and kind of working within their time frame. I'm curious if you could guide us on etiquette for somebody who's looking for horses, because I'm sure sometimes it gets excessive and sometimes
Right.
it's within reason for them. Like there's genuine interest and they're doing, I mean, and these are big investments. So they're doing the due
No kidding.
diligence that they, feel is appropriate. And at times you agree. So will you kind of guide us on etiquette? Because
Sure.
I was always very just hesitant to know how I was being perceived by the person that I was trying horses of, like, is this bothering them? There's so many things that are going through your mind when you're in this position. And I think if you do it only, once every 5, 7
7 years.
years, yeah, you
Sure.
don't really know what the norm is. So talk to us about that.
Sure. So, in terms of etiquette, I would say that let's start at the beginning. When you contact the buyer via phone or text or email, I have found that there are some people who send you literally 30 questions about the animal. And what I feel like always in that situation is, these are all great questions to ask, but these are more sort of second date questions than first date questions. Sort of the first date questions for me is, as someone looking for a horse, you need to do your due diligence. You need to find out the horse's record, and you can look at the horse's record and you can say, oh, there was a gap of a year. Why was there a gap of a year? Was there a child in university, or finishing their senior year? um, was the horse hurt? If so, how is it recovered? Um, if there are several 20s in a period and then it all looks good, did the horse have a problem with a certain type of fence? If so, what was that fence? How did you overcome it? Um, all of those questions. Those sort of questions are more appropriate sort of for the first time you're speaking with someone. Not as much as, what does the horse eat? How big a girth size? What blanket do they wear? Those are all, like I said, for later. So you've met the horse, you like the horse, but maybe you have a little PTSD. Maybe you had a horse that was fine at home, but when you took it off property, it was ballistic. Or maybe you had a horse that didn't load well in a trailer. Um, so for me, I'm really accommodating. I'm probably more accommodating than most people. You want to go to Boyd's? Okay, we can go to Boyd's. You want to go to Fairhill for a hack? Okay, let's go to Fairhill for a hack. You want to hack around my property? That's fine. Um, Generally, I'll accommodate anything within reason. Not, I'm going to drive to Virginia and go cross country schooling there. I'm 3.5 hours from there, and I have 3 venues I can, do here. Um, I generally think that after 3 tries, you know the horse well enough to sort of feel like this is a good match moving forward, or this isn't a good match. Um, it's pretty easy for me to sort of say to people, look, with the horses I sell, I'm always happy to resell them. I've gotten to be in a situation with my career for the domestic horses. I don't have to take every horse that's sent to me, because there are some horses that, again, I don't want to represent. I do feel like most horses have a home and have the right home, but if you've got a horse that has a bad record, that has a not a great attitude, that's had lots of injuries, that's not the horse you're going to find with me. And so it's very easy for me to say, if someone's come 3 times, look, tell me what your concerns are. If it doesn't work out, I'm happy to resell the animal. I'm happy to work with you. Again, usually they're working with a professional, but a lot of people, when you're looking at horses, not everybody has had great experiences. And so, in terms of trying horses, I think it's important as sellers sometimes to remember that, because it's very easy to forget that and be like, why can't they just make up their mind? And it's like, well, they have some bad experiences they have to get over. And so, again, asking what's normal, I think if you're transparent, then that's the best way to be. If I had a lady literally who came 5 times this spring to look at a horse, and I was a bit at my wit's end because I had talked to the trainer. She tried the horse hadn't put a foot wrong at all. And she just was like, I bought a young horse last time and it didn't work out. And what are we going to do? And I was like, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know what it's going to do. I feel like this is a good match.
Mm-hmm.
If it doesn't work out, I'm going to be here. And the other thing is, I'm not going anywhere. I've been doing this for 40 years almost. And this is what I do, and this is who I am, and these are the horses I represent. And so, for me, it's real important about the match. And so, she ended up buying the horse. The horse is great. She sent me a Christmas card with him and a Santa hat.
Oh.
Life is good. So, but yeah, I think as long as you can say, look, I had this experience, and that's, I just have to get over it a little bit.
Right. That seems to be kind of a big benefit of working with you, or I mean, I was going to say somebody else who has a similar experience, but I don't think that person is in the US. But working with you is getting your perspective on what the matches are looking like, because you've seen so many people test horses and you've seen so many people take those horses onto their careers with a new owner, that it's a really unique perspective, even compared to that person's trainer who might not be as experienced in seeing so
Sure.
many different, especially, I mean, Kinsey and I grew up in Minnesota, and everyone was just less exposed, trainers included.
Sure. Sure. Without a doubt. I mean, I've sold 50 to 60 horses for the last decade, and before that I sold 30 to 40 for the decade before that, and probably 20 to 30 for the decade before that. So, I mean, that's a lot of horses.
It's a lot of horses.
And I'm not going to say all of them have been successes, because they haven't, but I'd like to think that over time I've gotten better at what I do and better at reading the situation, and sort of both in terms of the horses and the people. And I think the big thing, like I said, is to be transparent and forthcoming. It's very hard when you're selling a horse, if you sort of don't know what people like or don't like. Like, I had someone looking at horses, jumpers, and I pulled out the quiet one first, and she did, and she sort of was like, hmm. And then I showed the next one, and it was better, and she liked that better. And then she just turned to me and she said, do you have anything that's like stronger, like sharper and more difficult, but like scopy still? And I swear to God, I've never had someone say that to me. And I was like, yeah, I've got that. Most people don't want that. And so,
Right.
anyway, she bought this horse, and she's been going great guns, and she's doing the meter 25s now on him after a year, and it's fantastic. But, like, had she not said that, I wouldn't have shown her that horse.
Right. So, and she really knows what she likes, and kind of, I mean, either just knows herself as a rider, or did some soul searching ahead of time. Like, what horses do I enjoy riding, or what do I enjoy riding about my past horse, and what don't
Sure.
I? Um, which is really interesting and important. I do think that as a buyer, it can feel like a first date too, in the sense that like
Oh, without a doubt.
they want to show up and be the best version of themselves for the seller and have something, you know, have something to prove, so you feel great about who this horse is landing with, which is great. But there's also, I mean, like you're saying, it's probably benefits everyone to be real and be like, to be honest, I'm scared of whatever. I'm scared of
Right, exactly.
a
Because
spook
we all
or
have those things. Like we
right.
all have, those moments when we sit on the horse and we're like, ugh, I really don't like this feeling. And whatever that
Yeah.
feeling is, there are different feelings, but like we I would think that Boyd and Philip have those feelings at times. But if you're being real, we all have those moments where we're just like, this isn't the ride I enjoy,
Mhm.
you
And
know.
especially with someone who has multiple sale horses in their barn, they wanna match you with the right one. So
Right.
say just saying it and, not putting more time into a test ride than you need to if they're hanging on your hands and that's what you hate the most.
Right, exactly. And sometimes you can stop and say, "Look, he's heavy in my hands. Do you have some thoughts on that?" And again, depending on the seller might go, well, yes, that's how that horse goes. Or no, that horse is usually pretty light. Let's try to do some transitions to lighten it up and see if you like the feel better. And then you work at it, for 5 minutes more, 10 minutes more. And if it gets better, great. If it doesn't, you put it away. Um, in terms of etiquette, I think that's an important piece too. Again, in Aiken and Ocala and Pennsylvania, we have lots of people here who look for horses and multiple days. Usually people come in for multiple days. And so if you have multiple horses you're going to be looking at, one, schedule them far enough apart that you can take your time with each horse. Um, but the other thing is, like, for example, if you're looking at 3 horses at my place, let's look at all 3 horses, right? And if you want to spend time with one of them and be like, I really like this horse, we can leave it tacked up. We can come back to it and ride it again. We can spend more time with it at the moment. It doesn't matter. But if you ride the first one and you're like, don't really love it, I might be like, well, let's jump some jumps anyway, more to get you over first jumpitis, because I think the second horse is going to be better, just so to give you a feel of things. So I might push that, but you don't have to spend time with the horses, and certainly if you're having a problem, you don't have to train the horses for us. If
Mm,
you get into a sort of a muddly patch, you don't have to say, okay, I'm going to fix this, and it's like, that's fine. You're not going to see the horse again. So
right.
that's our
There's
job
nothing
to fix it.
nothing to prove there. That is really interesting, and it's important to hear this stuff. Um,
Well, it's just one of those things. Yeah. And
so
then I would say the other thing I'd say, sorry for interrupting, when you leave, I think, again, first date itis, when you leave, oh, oh,
you're good, you're good.
I'm good. Um, you want to leave the seller with an idea of where they stand, and sometimes you might be like, I enjoyed the horse. I'm not really sure he's in my top 3. Either way, I'll let you know, and do that within 48 hours. Send them a text and say, look, I really enjoyed meeting you, and your horse just not the right match for me. Or, maybe in that evening you go, gosh, I'd really like to see that horse cross country. Or I'd like to come back and try that horse. Or do you have any video of it doing X, Y, and Z? So that you can get a feel. But it's always that you're always sort of in that space where you go, did they like it? Did they like me? Did they not like it? It goes both ways. And so it's nice to have some feedback.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a really nice rule of thumb, and, um, yeah, I think everyone would appreciate it. I'm there's so many things that I'm like,
Ask
so many
away, ask away.
avenues I wanna go down. I guess the first one is if somebody is looking at a horse, um, not at your farm, but at anyone's farm, whether it's somebody who's selling a lot of horses or just selling their own horse, what are some things that you would consider to be a red flag that might be like, this is not where I want to buy my horse from, or this something feels off, and I'm gonna at least be aware of this little
Yeah,
indicator.
and I think that right there is something feels off for whatever reason. I'm not comfortable. Um, a lot of people in this world sell horses. I've had people say to me directly, "I don't want to use you because you sell a lot of horses," and I'm like, "Well, here's the flip side of that. I sell a lot of horses, and I have to keep my reputation good." And so I'm not going to be selling horses that are inappropriate because I've been in this business for 35 years and I plan on being in the business for another, 25 years. And if I, make a mistake, I want to be able to fix it. Mistakes get made and that's fine. Um, so that's one thing. And a lot of times single horse sellers have one horse to sell and they just want to sell it and be done with it and they don't really want to see you again. Um, so just keep that in mind. Um, in terms of red flags, someone who I am a huge proponent, which has gotten me into trouble with some sellers, that if you decide to purchase a horse, that you should be able to access all of the vet records, everything, like soup to nuts. And any imaging that's been done, any x-rays, any ultrasounds, any visits to universities, any lameness exams, the whole 9 yards. And I've had people give me records that don't have a year in them, that are missing a year. And I'm like, well, what happened to that year? Oh, that was an important, blah, blah, blah. Well, I need that year. And people ask, well, how do you know if something's missing? Well, they get quarterly shots, at least semi-annual shots. So at least you can tell that they're getting their semi-annual shots. So you want to make sure that you get vet records. And if someone is sort of unwilling to do that, that's a red flag. I mean, I've sold horses that I've sent 35 pages of vet records on. So,
Wow.
an upper level horse that was coming down that, had injuries and, had different things, and we had to work on maintaining him and had, ultrasounds and whatever. And he landed in a beautiful home that was totally appropriate for him, and they still have him, and he's an old man. And I'm great friends with the people. And, I think a little bit was I was like, I want this horse to land in the right home for him.
Yeah.
I'm not interested in maximizing dollars. And this came out because I sold a horse a few years ago, um, 2 decades ago, probably now, that long time ago. Um, it was winter. The horse hadn't been clipped. It turned out that it had had PRP, and it had a PRP. It had a scar from the PRP by its tailhead that hadn't been disclosed. It turned out that the
Mm,
horse had had some soundness issues, hadn't been disclosed, and so that turned into a really mucky mess. And we had to. Everything turned out fine, but I never wanted to go through that again.
right. As far as expectation goes, expectations from the potential buyer, is it is it reasonable to want vet records past the current owner, or is it kind of reasonable
Oh, you
to
can't. Yeah, you can't.
yeah.
You can't do that per se. Speaking to prior owners is sort of a, I don't know. It's not really done, to be honest, but
Mhm.
it doesn't mean that you couldn't do it. A lot of times if I have a horse and, for example, in my program, and it's been with me for 3 years, and I bought it from a friend, and blah blah blah. I can make that introduction. But generally, no, you can only give the history you have.
Got it.
So,
And
and
since
for
we're on
example, like the imported horses, I have zero history usually. Like I have their X-rays and sort of where they are, and so, but usually they're young, so there's not much history there.
and is that why you don't have as many records, just because they're young, or is there something
Yeah.
to do with horses overseas and the
Well,
records
that,
they
and
would
I
have?
wouldn't I wouldn't get records from old owners. You know,
Oh, right. Yeah.
yeah, my partners are buying horses from farmers out of the field that have just been started, and they're not going to sell me something that's lame, or has had a lameness problem because they want me to come back. Um,
Right.
so, they have other avenues for that animal, but yeah, that's why I wouldn't have a history on that. And I bought a horse from them very early on. Actually, it was probably, I think it was the first horse I bought from them. And it was a slightly older horse, and they told me it had had some wind surgery, and that was fine, because, I knew about it.
Right. So to kind of recap, things that you would do for a horse that you're interested in, you would look at their show record, you would do maybe a couple of test rides on them,
Hmm.
hopefully not 5.
Hopefully not 5.
You would get their veterinary records with their current owner, request those and review those, and then potentially do a vet check. I don't know where you
Yep.
stand on whether that's like a definite need or not. Is there anything else that should be on that list? I know we talked about you may not spend time in the barn with the horse tacking it up and whatnot, so you may not see a lot of that. You may or may not be riding in a field, but are there other things that people should be
Sure.
thinking about?
So backing up just a second, vet checks, I think are hugely important to protect sellers and buyers, because I don't want to hear 2 weeks down the road that the horse is lame when I know it was sound when it left me. And things happen, right? Things happen. They're horses. They get into all sorts of trouble. But I think it protects you starting off. So of all of the horses that I have ever sold, I think I haven't had 2 vetted when I've sold them. Like
Wow.
that's how low the number is for me.
Yeah.
Um, the second thing is, finding a vet. You need to use a vet you're comfortable with. All of us think our personal vets are the best vets in the world, because otherwise we'd use someone else. Um, in Minnesota, I'm sure you had less sports performance horses, vets. In Pennsylvania, we have a ton of them. And so we're very lucky here. So it sort of depends on, do you use the seller's vet? That's that can be a yes, depending on how rich the area is on vets. The other thing is, if you're working with a professional to help you and they happen to know the seller's vet, like for example in Pennsylvania, I can tell you my personal vet is almost harder on my vettings than she is on a regular vetting, because she doesn't want to have any question of her impartiality to the
Yeah.
situation. Um, so that's that. In terms of other things to do to finish the 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 sale or the purchase, one really important thing when you're using a seller's agent or you're using a professional is, before you start this whole process, talk about how that person is going to get paid. Are they going to get a commission? Who's responsible for paying the commission? Are they negotiating the price of the sale? Um, and then if it's professional, and let's say it's someone you ride with, and they don't have a lot of time to look at videos and just search out horses, that they do this as an adjunct to their training and lesson program. So if you're going to be doing the legwork and calling and getting the videos and finding the records and getting all the other stuff, will they be charging you hourly? Will they charge you for travel and expenses and then a smaller commission? But know that and have that written into the bill of sale, so that, for example, most sellers agents will be paid by the seller at the time of the sale, and that's disclosed. Um, Sometimes the buyer's agent commission will be, also paid by the seller, quote unquote. It'll be built into the price of the horse. Sometimes the buyer's agent will be paid by the buyer separately. Sometimes there's a third person involved in there, like me, who's put together the seller's agent and the buyer's agent, and there's a third party in there, their commission needs to be disclosed as well, all on the bill of sale. So you don't get people getting a double commission, which is illegal. And you're understanding where all the money is going, both
Who's
from the seller standpoint and the buyer standpoint. And oh,
so
wait, one more thing. The seller should sign the bill of sale and the buyer should sign the bill of sale. No agents sign anything because
got it.
it's not a contract between the agents. It's a contract between the seller and the buyer.
Okay. You mentioned that you would be a third person in your case. Wouldn't you be the seller's agent in a lot of cases, like with these horses that
Most
come in on
cases.
consignment?
Yeah, most cases.
Okay.
But for a long time, if I had, let's say I have a friend who has a wonderful horse and it's not, nobody's getting to see it for whatever reason, or I have a
Mhm.
client that I'm like, ah, that horse would be perfect. Generally, there is a finder's fee or a commission paid to myself or the person who made it happen, basically.
Yes. Okay, that makes sense. Um, I'm thinking about how like residential real estate transactions have generally
Yep.
a standard and then people can kind of get creative beyond that if they decide to. If there were a standard agreement between a buyer's agent and a seller's agent, what would that be, or does it just not exist?
In terms of getting commissions or what they get paid, or
Yeah, like, is it generally let's say, is it generally like, I don't know what would be reasonable, which is why it's probably good to ask, but, like, let's say both the buyer's agent and the seller's agent typically get 5% commission each of the sale, and that's paid by the seller, so they need to consider either, like, the price
sure.
or just that that's gonna come out of their pocket.
Sure. Again, let's assume most deals, buyer's agent is paid by the buyer, seller's agent is paid by the seller.
Okay.
So that's usually how it works. And let's say there's not a third person involved in there. Um, Generally, in terms of my commission structure, I charge 20% to anywhere from 15 to 20% for horses that are $15,000 and less
Okay.
as a commission. And then for horses that are more than 15,000, I charge anywhere between 10 and 15%. It sort of depends on the situation, but so those are my fees. And a lot of people are like, well, why do you charge more for a less expensive horse? And the answer is they are harder to sell and they take a lot more effort.
Yeah, and it just you have to get to kind of a minimum threshold, I would imagine, for it to
Right.
ever, like, be worth your while. Um, Thank you for being so transparent about that because it's really I mean, clearly I had no idea how it
Well,
works.
and the other thing is, a lot of times, if at the end of the day you've got a very expensive horse, people will downgrade their commission, or if you need to fix it because this person has, let's say, $20,000 to spend, and they don't have the money to pay the buyer's agent, and they don't have the money to like they have $20,000, the horse is priced at 25, the seller doesn't want to drop that low, you got to pay commissions. We're all, again, I think the most important thing to remember, again, be transparent, and that if you have a horse that you want to buy, sellers have a horse that they want to sell, and usually there's a price somewhere in there that everybody can get comfortable with. And the point of a good negotiation is that usually no one's 100% happy with it. And
Yeah,
so you have to work to that. And to that end, I've done deals where they, they didn't have all the cash up front, but they had the majority of it. And then within 45 days, the rest of it was paid, so that, if in the example of the lady had 20 and the horse was priced at 25, but the seller didn't want to go that low because she had to pay commissions, like then we sort of worked it out so it was a little bit more money so that um the seller could get paid, but it was done over time.
that's really interesting. Um, that reminds me, like Kinsey and I were coming up with this idea for a business financing horse sales was one of them, because it's kind of interesting that it's such a, it's a big investment, and
Sure.
it's not, there's not a normal route to go with financing like that. So if anybody if anybody wants a business idea, I'm sure Courtney would be a good person to talk to about
There
that,
you
or
go.
maybe Kinsey and I
We've
will do
done
it.
some interesting things over time.
That's good to know. I mean, it
Yeah.
really is good to know that, like, having that conversation and maybe just working something out that feels good for everyone, but like you said, not like perfect or like a home run for anyone, is an okay
Right,
place to
right.
land.
And I
Uh,
would say, like, my job and a lot of my clients and friends are like, you're such an enabler. And again, like, I love matching horses for riders. That's like what I love to do. I love seeing a good match. I love hearing that the timid adult who was so scared about riding the horse just won her first novice. Like,
yeah,
I really love hearing about all that. And it doesn't have to be, oh, I won. It could be as easy as, I went out of the ring on a hack today,
hmm,
and I didn't lose my shit, if they had been really scared about that. And so, I think if you want to buy a horse, there are lots of different ways to go about doing it, but you have to put yourself out there. It's like a first date. You got to put yourself out there, and you got to sort of say, here I am, and this is what I want to do. But also, going back to etiquette, don't go tire kicking.
right,
Don't show up and want to, look at $100,000 horse and you really got a budget of 30.
right.
Like, that's not fair to anybody.
Hmm.
And
Including the horse who has to get
including the
test ridden.
most, yeah, exactly. And it's very, very hard, I think, on the horses. Like, I think they're social animals. They like relationships. They want to know their people. And especially if they're in a sales situation like with me, they're ridden by several different people sometimes, and it's confusing to them, and
Right.
they don't get it sometimes.
Hmm. Yeah. Okay. Well, I've taken you a couple minutes past the hour, but
Okay, we can keep
but
going, or we can just go another week. That's
well,
yeah, the two
before we
sure.
end, one thing I really want to make sure we cover is just like how to contact you and who should contact you, because something I didn't ask, I'll ask a couple of questions here about your
Okay.
business. So, how many horses do you have for sale in your barn at a given time, give or take? I know that probably fluctuates significantly. And then what level horses are you pairing people with? I think I know the answer to that, but just so that we get that out there. And how can people contact you?
Sure. I probably have somewhere. It's always funny because people think I run this huge operation, and it's big enough, but it's not huge. I probably have 8 to 10 sale horses at any given time, which is not an absolutely huge number,
It's
but
a good
I mean,
number.
it's a good number. But I'm not by no means a Paul Shakamo.
Yeah.
Um, so probably 8 to 10. In terms of horses, usually we run the gamut, or I can find it.
Mm,
I've sold horses for $15,000. I have sold horses for, more than $100,000. So it really depends on what you're looking for. And real quickly, the other thing I would tell you is, when you start the process and you're looking as an amateur to try to figure out what you want to do, I think it's real important to do a couple different things. One of which is make a list of your absolute no's, which
mm,
which are not, I'd prefer a gelding over a mare. It's, I've had a horse that had this injury, and regardless, I can't mentally deal with it. If the horse has had that injury, I can't go back there right now. I've got to let some time pass. Or, for example, um, I'm in a very small community in terms of boarding barns. I really like the barn I'm at, the professional I'm with. There are limited people I can go to. They don't allow cribbers. That means strike them off the list. Don't even go there. Don't waste your time. And then once you have your absolute no list, make your sort of ideal horse list, which for me is 6 factors. It's age, height, sex, experience, potential, and budget. And those 6 things sort of drive what you look at. And so if you have those 6 factors and you're like, I want a horse that moves like a top dressage horse, I want a show jumper like Sapphire, and I want a horse that goes cross country like Commando, you better have a big number. If you want Glamourdale, Sapphire, and Commando together, you better have a big budget. The other thing is to know, for example, I had a client years ago who was looking for preliminary pecker. She had a healthy enough budget. We looked at lots of horses, we looked all over, but we never found one that sort of she was excited about, previous injuries, bad records, um, rideability, those types of things. And one day she came to me and she said, well, what do you think about Harry? Who at that point was a young horse that I had ported from Ireland. She'd sort of seen him when she'd been down training. And I said, that would be fine, but it's going to be a different journey than buying the preliminary pecker, which is what you want. But we would hope that this 4-year-old over time would develop into what you want. And it has. She was second at the ACs in the preliminary, and she's done a 2-star, and I think she was in the top 10. But like, if you have sort of your general, this is what I'm looking for, don't be, don't be so rigid that you're like, I'm really only want a gelding. Well, half the world is mares.
Right.
And, Fisher Rokana is a mare, Sapphire is a girl, like there are a lot of good girls. And there are a lot of kind of marish geldings in the world as well. So, but that's important. So sorry, I digressed.
Thank you so much for adding that in. I was sitting here like, thank you for thank you for making sure that I cover my bases, because those are really, really important. That's like such an actionable takeaway, 2 actionable takeaways to add. And then as far as people who would be appropriate to reach out to you, I mean, you mentioned that you cover the spectrum in terms of cost level as well. Like if I was a beginner,
Yes.
novice, adult, amateur rider, you're an okay
Yeah,
person to call.
exactly. I cover the gamut, from up down horses and quiet, easy horses to hopefully 5-star prospects. I've got several 5-star riders who have young horses in their barn. Um, so we run the gamut.
Mhm.
I had someone approach me about the foal we just had, which was kind of exciting. I don't know if we're gonna get there or not, but so we do all of it. Um,
Yeah.
Another really quick takeaway before I forget this. I think it's really important as an adult amateur that you look at who you're going to follow. So, as a rider, so if I'm, for example, I've used Boyd because I was just at Windura today. Thank you, Boyd, for having a great cross country place.
Yeah.
If I'm looking at a horse that Boyd has ridden and has ridden successfully, I'm probably not going to be quite as successful. I'm smaller, I'm less strong, and I'm a female. So you have to factor that in a little bit, because if you're going to be following someone who has a lot of strength, is that this right person for you to follow as a, maybe a timid adult amateur in their 50s, you know? So you've got to think about that. And there are several people I know I could never follow. Like there are riders that I know that I would have a whole lot of trouble based on the way they ride, that I would be successful. And so I think you have to, when you're looking at horses, you also have to factor who's been riding them.
Do you think that's because the horse's previous success, let's say with Boyd, is not an indicator of your success just because you're such a different rider? Or do you think it's because that horse has been trained to respond to a certain type of riding that does not match your type of riding?
Probably in the case of Boyd and me, it would probably be more because of our physical attributes
Mhm.
than the trainability. But when you're talking about an adult amateur, a lot of times, like one of the great things about our program is I have my working students ride the horses.
Mm.
So I know how they're going to go for the most part for someone less experienced. Um, there are a lot of very good riders very, very good riders that can make horses look great and they feel great. And then you get them home 2 weeks down the road and they're nothing like they were. And that's because that very good rider maybe knew how to prep the horse, knew how to train the horse, knew what to do with the horse, was able to manage anxieties, all of those things. And so for the typical adult amateur, you'd like to have someone you can follow, one that you can trust, and two, you can see make a mistake and the horse. I love it actually when people make mistakes when they ride horses and that the horses forgive them. But you want to see that. But I think it's real important because not only is it in the trainability, because that factors in. There are a lot of people that are really quite good, and the horses are never quite as good when they go on, because it's hard to duplicate the training that they're getting. And then the other thing is in terms of following. Boyd is so soft and lovely to watch ride, but there are a lot of men who use their strength, to ride a horse. And I'm never going to be as strong as a man is in general, and so I have to learn how to ride differently. And so you sort of go, okay, well, is this horse quiet because of strength? And if so, is that something I'm going to deal with? Or, the horse is being shown and it's lovely and it's sweet and it's quiet and it's wonderful, but it's being shown by a man and it's got a pretty big bit in its mouth.
Mhm.
And what's it going to be in 6 months when I'm riding it and I'm a lot smaller and I put a little less bit in it?
That's a super interesting consideration. My mind, if the horse was with, exclusively like a 5-star rider before, or Grand Prix dressage rider before me, I'd be like, that horse is trained perfectly. What a gift. But it's so important to consider, like, that's why this horse is performing. Is
Right.
there any way to know whether it'll do half of this for,
Yeah, and I think
me?
you can get a sense by also seeing a program success. A lot of people ask me, well, how do you know if you're going to see someone and you don't know them? How do you feel good about buying a horse from them? And I think you look at where have the horses that program have sold gone on to success, and if so, success in what you want to do. It might be one thing if a program sells a lot of horses and they go on to be upper level horses. That's great if you want an upper level horse, but if you want a novice packer, not so great. If you have a program like mine and you sort of look and you go, okay, they've had success from beginner, novice up through intermediate, that's fantastic. um, and you can often check, let's say you're like, oh, this person only sells, one or two horses every couple of years. Well, look at the horse that they have ridden. Go to the USCA and look up the rider, and then look up, some of their horses, and you can look onto what the horses have done once they've been sold. And sometimes if you want, and that's not always a true indicator because sometimes the relationship didn't work or whatever, but you can reach out to that person on Facebook or Instagram or whatever and say, what was your experience? Was the horse honestly represented? Is there anything I need to know? Type of thing.
That feels like a real pro move. And this whole conversation has really, I mean, I'm obviously pretending I'm in the shoes of a buyer, but it's really equipped me to be a smart buyer. And I know people who are listening who are actually either in the market right now or have that on their horizon have to feel that way as well. So, what's your website, or where is the best place
Sure.
for people to find you? And do you list, you probably are, just because things change, you're not listing the horses you have available, right?
I would like to tell you that we do. We've sort of just in the last month we've moved up from Aiken. We had a full. I'm getting ready to do a couple of longs with my upper level horses. So the websites are not up to date. Usually they're more up to date. But if you don't see something on the two websites, which are csquarefarm.com, the letter C, the word square, the word farm.com, or Excel Star Sporthorses.com, feel free to reach out to me. And the best way to get me is either to email csquarefarm@gmail.com or to text me on 610-952-5347, and I will respond accordingly. But I generally keep a list of um, clients that need horses. And, I hope to fill, sort of fill the order and find the horses. I'm not, um, I don't, I guess I don't try to find horses just to find horses. But if I know of a nice horse that I think will suit the bill that I don't have, then I will let you know, if that makes sense.
Yes, that's so helpful. Thank you for that. And I hope, I mean, either you tell me or whoever the person is tell me, because I'm excited for some Ride IQ members to find their next partner through you.
That would be
So
great.
don't keep me in the dark about that. But Courtney, you've been so incredibly generous with your time and your insight. And I mean, you're the perfect interviewee because you really, made sure that we got what we needed. So thank you so much
No
for
worries. Thank you.
doing it with us.
Happy to do it again.
Great. Yeah, I mean, that's my favorite thing to hear because like I said, as we were going, I'm like looking at my notes I took before this and I'm like, there's so many ways I could pick your brain, but this was a great foundational episode. And good luck with everything that you have going
Thank you.
on and that
Thank
you're
you.
doing.